Chapter 1. A rocky beginning James could hardly believe his luck or, rather, his lack thereof. The 32-year-old Brit had been told by his probation officer that volunteering at the Yoruba Cultural Centre in London was his best shot at avoiding more serious community service. It wasn't exactly how he envisioned spending his evenings, especially not in a small community centre surrounded by cultural artefacts he had little interest in. "Look, James," his officer had said firmly, "this is about learning respect. You'll help with events, engage with the community, and maybe, just maybe, you'll grow a little as a person." James didn't see the point. To him, the job was just another tick box in the tedious chain of his life. He sauntered into the centre on his first day, his usual arrogance in full display. His appearance, a wrinkled hoodie, ripped jeans, and scuffed trainers immediately clashed with the vibrant and carefully curated environment of the centre. Seated near the entrance was Auntie Murayo, the heart and soul of the Yoruba Cultural Centre. She was in her mid-50s, a commanding woman whose presence filled the room even when she was seated. Dressed in a flowing iro and buba in rich earth tones, her hurle sat high atop her head, like a crown. Her dark eyes sparkled with intelligence and no-nonsense authority. She had seen volunteers come and go, but James was unlike any she had encountered before. "Ah, you must be the new volunteer," she said, rising gracefully from her chair. "Yeah, that's me," James said with a casual wave, not bothering to make eye contact. Auntie Murayo's gaze sharpened. She extended her hand, expecting a proper handshake, but James simply nodded toward her instead. "So, what do you want me to do? Sweep the floor or something?" The corners of her mouth tightened. "We will start with an introduction," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Here at the Yoruba Cultural Centre, we preserve the rich traditions of the Yoruba people, our language, clothing, and customs. Do you know anything about Yoruba culture?" James shrugged. "Not really. Isn't it all about, like, drums and dancing or something?" Auntie Murayo's nostrils flared ever so slightly, but she maintained her composure. "The Yoruba culture is vast and deep. It is about family, language, spirituality, art, and the strength of community. You will learn this while you are here." "Right," James said dismissively, glancing at his phone. "Whatever you say." Chapter 2. Setting the stage for Change James's first week at the centre was a disaster. He showed up late, left early, and muttered half-hearted apologies when Auntie Murayo corrected him. His lack of respect grated on her nerves, but what truly irked her was his attitude toward women. He often interrupted the female volunteers, dismissed their suggestions, and made inappropriate jokes that earned him sharp glares from the staff. By the end of the week, Auntie Murayo had had enough. She called James into her office, a small but elegant room adorned with traditional Yoruba artwork and shelves filled with books on history and culture. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to the chair in front of her desk. James sat, slouching as if he couldn't care less. "James," she began, folding her hands neatly in front of her, "your behaviour here has been unacceptable." "Look, I didn't mean to offend anyone," he said, his tone defensive. "Intent is irrelevant," she said sharply. "What matters is the impact of your actions. You have insulted my culture and disrespected the women here. This is not how we treat others in Yoruba society. You have much to learn." James rolled his eyes. "Yeah, okay. So what do you want me to do? Bow down and start chanting or something?" Auntie Murayo leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "No, James. I want you to understand what it means to be part of something greater than yourself. You are selfish, rude, and ignorant, but I will not give up on you. You will learn respect, humility, and pride in culture. And by the time I am finished with you, you will embody everything you currently mock." James frowned, not fully understanding what she meant. "Okay, so do I mop the floor or—" "First," she said, rising to her full height and towering over him, "you will change how you present yourself. No more jeans and hoodies. You will dress properly while you are here. I will provide you with suitable attire." "Wait, what? You're going to tell me how to dress now?" "Yes," she said firmly, "because clearly you do not know how to present yourself with dignity." Chapter 3. A proper introduction the next day. James arrived at the centre to find a neatly folded outfit waiting for him. A plain iro and buba in soft brown tones, paired with a matching gel. "You've got to be joking," he muttered under his breath as he held up the traditional attire. "I do not joke about my culture," Auntie Murayo said, appearing in the doorway. "Put it on." "I'm not wearing this," he protested. "You will," she said simply. "Or you can explain to your probation officer why you refuse to fulfill your community service." Grumbling, James retreated to the changing room. It took him a while to figure out how to wrap the iro correctly, and when he emerged, his discomfort was palpable. "This is ridiculous," he said, tugging at the fabric. "Stand up straight," Auntie Moreo commanded. She adjusted the booba, ensuring it hung properly, then tied the gel around his head with practiced precision. When she was finished, she stepped back to admire her work. "There," she said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Now, you look presentable." James caught his reflection in a nearby mirror and froze. The person staring back at him looked nothing like the man he saw in the mirror every morning. The flowing fabric, the intricate gelliet was all so foreign. "I look ridiculous," he muttered. "You look proper," Auntie Moreo corrected him. "Now, let us begin your real education." Chapter 4. Resistance Meets Resolve. James stood awkwardly in the centre of the room, tugging at the edges of the iro wrapped around his waist. His discomfort was written all over his face, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He glanced at Auntie Moreo, who stood nearby with her arms crossed, her expression calm yet unyielding. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, his fingers gripping the fabric. "Is this a skirt? I can't wear this." Auntie Moreo raised an eyebrow, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It is not a skirt," she said, her voice firm but patient. "It is an iro, a traditional Yoruba wrapper worn with pride and dignity." "Well, whatever it is, I can't wear it. People will laugh at me," James exclaimed, throwing his hands up. "Who will laugh at you? The people who know nothing of our culture? The ones who think wearing hoodies and ripped jeans is the pinnacle of fashion?" she retorted, her words cutting through his protest. "If they laugh, it is because they are ignorant. Do not be like them, James. You are here to learn, not to mock." James bit his lip, glancing down at the outfit again. The iro was tied snugly around his waist, paired with a loose booba that hung down to his thighs. It wasn't just the unfamiliarity of the clothing that bothered him, it was the vulnerability he felt while wearing it. "And this thing on my head," he gestured to the gel tied neatly around his scalp. "It's so tight I can't think straight. Why do I even need it?" Auntie Moreo stepped forward, her voice softening slightly. "The gele is not just a piece of fabric. It is a symbol of pride, of identity, of tradition. Do you think Yoruba women wear it because it is easy or comfortable? No, we wear it because it represents who we are. If you cannot wear it with honor, you are not ready to learn what it means to be part of this culture," he sighed, frustration evident in his posture. "But I'm not Yoruba, Auntie. Why are you making me do this?" Her gaze softened, but only slightly. "Because, James, you have much to learn not just about Yoruba culture, but about respect, humility, and understanding. This is not just about clothes. It is about seeing the world through a different lens. And whether you like it or not, you will wear this until you can do so without complaint." Chapter 5. Learning the first lessons the day continued with James reluctantly assisting Auntie Moreo with preparations for an upcoming cultural event. His tasks were simple organizing fabrics, setting up decorations, but every movement felt awkward and constrained in his new attire. The weight of the iro around his waist and the tightness of the gel made him hyper-aware of every step he took. As he worked, Auntie Moreo observed him quietly, noting his discomfort, but also his effort. She spoke sparingly, letting the silence settle around them until James finally broke it. "So, why do you care so much about all this?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Why is it so important to you?" Auntie Moreo paused, her hands smoothing the edges of a decorative tablecloth. "Because it is who we are," she said simply. "When I came to this country as a young woman, I saw so many of my people losing themselves, forgetting their language, their customs, their pride. I swore I would never let that happen to me." She straightened, her eyes distant as she continued. "I had a daughter once, Aduni. She was bright, strong, full of life, but she wanted so badly to fit into this world to be accepted by people who didn't understand her. She stopped speaking Yoruba, refused to wear traditional clothes, and eventually, she left. I haven't seen her in years." James shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say. I didn't know." "Of course, you didn't," she said sharply, her gaze snapping back to him. "Because you don't think about anyone but yourself. But you will learn, James. You will learn what it means to respect where you come from, even if it is not your own." Chapter 6. The next step the following day, Auntie Moreo handed James a tray of food to serve to the other volunteers during their break. She had spent the morning teaching him how to prepare moin moin and jollof rice, her instructions sharp and precise. "Carry it properly," she said as he wobbled under the weight of the tray. "A proper woman does not stumble." He shot her a look, but the tray steadied in his hands. "Why do you keep saying that? I'm not a woman." "Not yet," she replied with a sly smile, turning back to the pot she was stirring. James blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "What do you mean, not yet?" She didn't answer, her focus entirely on the food. He decided not to push the subject, but her words lingered in his mind as he moved through the room, serving the volunteers. That afternoon, she presented him with a new challenge, learning how to walk gracefully while balancing a book on his head. "This is ridiculous," he grumbled as she placed the book atop his jelly. "What does this have to do with anything?" "It teaches poise," she said matter-of-factly. "A Yoruba woman carries herself with dignity. She does not slouch or stomp like an elephant." He rolled his eyes but complied, his steps slow and deliberate as he tried to keep the book steady. Auntie Marayo watched him with a critical eye, occasionally correcting his posture with a sharp word or a light tap on his shoulder. "Better," she said after several attempts. "You are learning." "Great," he muttered under his breath. "Can't wait to show off my new skills." She ignored his sarcasm, her attention already shifting to the next task. "Tomorrow, you will learn how to tie your own gel, and you will do it perfectly." Chapter 7. Language and Etiquette. James sighed heavily as he entered the cultural centre, once again dressed in an iro and buba that Auntie Marayo had laid out for him earlier. The fabric itched less now, and the snug fit around his waist had become less of a distraction. Still, the sight of himself in the mirror that morning had sent a wave of frustration through him. Each day, he felt less like himself, and more like the person Auntie Marayo seemed intent on crafting. "You're late." Her sharp voice greeted him as soon as he stepped into the main hall. She stood near a table piled high with books, her gel sitting tall and regal on her head. "I told you to arrive at 10 sharp. It's only 5 past, he muttered, avoiding her piercing gaze. "Late is late, James," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "Punctuality is a sign of respect. Sit down." He shuffled over to the table, his shoulders slumped. "What's all this?" he asked, motioning to the books. "Today, you will begin learning Yoruba," she said, her lips curling into a faint smile. "If you are to be part of this centre, you must understand our language. Otherwise, how will you communicate with visitors? Can't someone else do it?" he grumbled. "No," she replied curtly. "Now repeat after me, Boyni." James frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means, how are you?" "Now repeat it." "Bawoni," he said, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. Auntie Marayo clicked her tongue in disapproval. No, you must listen carefully. It is Bawoni. Speak it with confidence. A Yoruba woman does not mumble." He flushed at her choice of words but tried again. "Bawoni?" "Better," she said with a nod. "Now, the response, Didani. It means, I'm fine, thank you." James repeated the phrase slowly, his tongue tripping over the unfamiliar syllables. Auntie Marayo corrected him patiently, her tone softening slightly as she guided him through each word. By the end of the session, he could form a few simple sentences, though his accent still needed work. "You will practice these every day," she instructed, handing him a small notebook filled with phrases. "And you will greet me in Yoruba from now on. No more of your gruff English hello. Understood?" "Yes, Auntie," he said automatically, then winced as he realised how naturally the response had come. Etiquette lessons after the language session, Auntie Marayo led him to a small sitting area adorned with intricately carved chairs and a low table. She gestured for him to sit, and he lowered himself clumsily onto the chair, his posture slouched. "Sit properly," she snapped, her voice sharp. "A Yoruba woman carries herself with grace." He sighed, but straightened his back, folding his hands neatly in his lap as she had taught him before. "Better," she said approvingly. "Now, when someone enters the room, what do you do?" Say hello?" he guessed. "Not just any hello," she corrected. "You rise to greet them. You show respect. Try it." She stood and walked out of the room, then re-entered a moment later. James hesitated before rising to his feet, his movements stiff and awkward. "Again," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. They repeated the exercise several times until his movements were fluid and natural. By the end, he was rising and bowing slightly, as if it were second nature. "Good," she said finally. "Now, when you address someone older, you must use the proper titles. For example, you will call me Auntie Marayo because I am your elder. Do you understand?" Yes, Auntie Mario, he replied, the words slipping out without hesitation. She smiled, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. Very good. You are learning. A compliment and its consequences. Later that day, James was organising books in the centre's small library when one of the female volunteers approached him. It was Lake, a tall, elegant woman in her late 30s whom he had insulted during his first week. She had barely spoken to him since, her demeanour icy whenever they crossed paths. Hello, Deo, she said, using the name Auntie Mario had insisted on calling him. Her voice was warmer than he expected, and he glanced up warily. Hi, he said, his voice still carrying a slight edge of defensiveness. She looked him over, her eyes lingering on the jail wrapped tightly around his head. You look nice today, she said with a small smile. He blinked, unsure how to respond. Thanks, I guess. Her smile widened, and she nodded approvingly before walking away, leaving James staring after her in confusion. The compliment echoed in his mind, stirring a strange mix of emotions. Part of him bristled at the idea of being complimented for something so far removed from his usual self, but another part, a quieter, unfamiliar part, felt a flicker of pride? Auntie's reflection that evening. As James practiced his Yoruba phrases in the quiet of the centre, Auntie Mario watched him from a distance. She had seen the way Lake had spoken to him earlier, the slight flush in his cheeks when she complimented him. It was a small moment, but an important one. Slowly but surely, he was beginning to see himself through the eyes of others, not as James, the brash and insensitive man who had walked into her centre weeks ago, but as Dio, someone who could embody the dignity and grace of Yoruba culture. Her thoughts drifted back to her daughter Aduni. If only she had been able to guide her this way, to teach her the strength and pride that came with embracing her heritage. Perhaps she wouldn't have lost her to the lure of Western ideals. But Aduni was gone, and now she had Deo a new canvas on which to paint her legacy. Deo, she called softly, and he looked up from his notebook. Come here. He rose and approached her, his steps hesitant. Yes, Auntie? You did well today, she said, her voice gentle. Keep practicing, and soon you will speak Yoruba as naturally as you breathe. Thank you, Auntie, he murmured, his gaze dropping to the floor. She smiled, her pride tempered by the weight of her mission. There was still much work to be done, but she was patient. In time, Deo would not just speak the language, he would live it. Chapter 8. The art of the jail. Auntie Mario stood in front of the mirror, her tall frame poised and commanding, a vivid jail wrapped expertly around her head. Her reflection was one of dignity and strength, and as her eyes flicked toward James, she noted the way he avoided meeting her gaze. He was seated across the room, his posture straighter than it had been weeks ago, his hands neatly folded in his lap. Gone were his lazy slouches and dismissive shrugs. His body language now carried an unspoken deference. Deo, she said, her tone light yet firm. Come here. Yes, Auntie Mario, he replied, rising to his feet without hesitation. The words came naturally now, his voice softer and more polite than the brash retorts he had once favoured. It wasn't until he was standing beside her that he realised he had answered her so reflexively, as if it were second nature. His cheeks reddened slightly, but Auntie Mario's approving nod quelled any lingering protest. Today, you will learn to tie your own gel, she announced, pulling a vibrant piece of fabric from the table beside her. James blinked, his brow furrowing. I don't think thinking is not what you are good at, she interrupted smoothly, her lips curving into a sly smile. Following instructions, however, is something you are learning. He swallowed his protest as she handed him the fabric. It was soft and heavy in his hands, its intricate patterns glinting faintly in the light. A proper Yoruba woman must know how to tie her gele, she said, guiding him toward the mirror. It is not just a head wrap, it is a crown. It shows pride, respect, and grace, and it is time you learn to wear it with dignity. The lesson begins. Auntie Mario stood behind him, her hands moving deftly as she demonstrated the first fold. Watch carefully, she instructed. Every movement must be precise. The fabric must sit snugly, but not so tight that you cannot carry yourself with poise. James watched her reflection in the mirror, his throat tightening as he absorbed her words. He mimicked her movements, fumbling slightly as he tried to fold the fabric into neat pleats. No, she said, stepping closer and adjusting the fabric in his hands. Your folds are uneven. Try again. He let out a small sigh but complied, his fingers trembling slightly as he worked. Auntie Mario's presence behind him was both comforting and intimidating, her steady gaze making it clear that failure was not an option. After several attempts, the fabric began to take shape. The pleats were cleaner now, the folds tighter and more uniform. He followed her instructions to secure the gel at the back of his head, tying it firmly but carefully. "Good," she said, nodding approvingly. "Now, shape it." "Shape it?" he echoed, his voice uncertain. "Yes," she said, stepping beside him and gesturing to the fabric. "The gel must frame your face. It must sit tall and proud like a crown. Use your hands to adjust it." His fingers hesitated, but under her watchful eye, he began shaping the fabric. It felt strange and foreign, yet there was a small flicker of satisfaction as the gel began to take form. When he finally stepped back and looked at his reflection, his breath caught in his throat. The person staring back at him was unfamiliar, yet strangely captivating. The gel sat high and regal on his head, its vibrant patterns drawing attention to his features. He felt an odd mix of emotions, pride at having done it correctly, and shame at the realization that he was wearing it at all. Auntie's approval turn, Auntie Moreo commanded, and he obediently swiveled to face her. Her sharp eyes scanned him from head to toe, taking in the neat folds of the gel and the way it framed his face. For a moment she said nothing, and James felt his heart pound in the silence. "Well done," she said finally, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You see? When you listen and apply yourself, you can achieve great things." The unexpected praise sent a wave of warmth through him, though he quickly tried to suppress it. "Thanks," he mumbled, his eyes darting away. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You have done well, Deo. But remember, it is not enough to wear the gel. You must carry yourself as if you were born to it. Stand tall, walk gracefully, and let the world see your pride." He nodded, unsure of how else to respond. "Yes, Auntie Moreo." Her smile deepened. "Good. Now go fetch the mirror and practice tying it again. You will not leave this room until you can do it perfectly." Reflection and conflict as James returned to the mirror and began practicing the steps again. His thoughts swirled with conflicting emotions. He hated how easily her words of approval affected him, how they made him want to meet her expectations even as part of him resisted. The gel on his head felt heavy, not just physically, but symbolically. It was a reminder of how far he had drifted from the man he used to be. "Why am I doing this?" he muttered under his breath, his hands working on the folds. "This isn't me. This can't be me." But when he looked at his reflection, a strange sense of accomplishment flickered beneath the doubt. The folds were smoother now, the pleats more precise. He adjusted the fabric, shaping it into a proud arch that framed his face perfectly. For a brief moment he felt proud. Auntie's reflection as she watched him from across the room, Auntie Moreo's mind wandered to her own journey. She had been just a young woman when she left Nigeria, her head filled with dreams of a brighter future. But life in a foreign land had not been kind. She had lost much her connection to her culture, her daughter Aduni, and a sense of belonging. Now, she had Dio. She saw in him a chance to rebuild what had been lost, to create something beautiful and lasting. Each fold of the gele, each phrase of Yoruba he learned, was a step toward a future where her culture would not only survive, but thrive. "You are learning, Deo," she murmured to herself, her heart swelling with pride. "And soon, you will carry this pride as if it were your own." Chapter 9. A new evening ritual. The room was quiet, except for the faint rustle of fabric, as James adjusted the folds of his iro. The scent of spices lingered in the air, remnants of the evening meal he had helped Auntie Moreo prepare. He was seated at the small table in her sitting room, his back straight, hands folded neatly in his lap. His gel was tied as perfectly as he could manage after hours of practice, though Auntie had stepped in earlier to correct a few minor details. She entered the room carrying a small tray with 2 cups of tea and a jar of cream. Her movements were deliberate, regal, and James felt himself straighten further under her watchful gaze. "Deo," she said, setting the tray down, "it is time for your evening practice." "Yes, Auntie Moreo," he replied reflexively, his voice softer and more respectful than it had been weeks ago. "Repeat after me," she instructed, folding her arms across her chest. James took a deep breath, his accent still clumsy with the unfamiliar sounds. "Oruko mi ni dayo obinrin Yoruba agberaga ni mi." "No, no," she said sharply, her tone filled with the patience of a teacher, but the authority of a general. "Listen carefully. It is Oruko mi ni dayo obinrin Yoruba agberaga ni mi." Speak it with pride, not like a schoolboy mumbling in the back of the classroom. He nodded, swallowing his frustration, and tried again. Orukomini dayo, obinrin yoruba agbaraganimi. Better, she said with a nod. Again. They repeated the phrase until it rolled off his tongue with ease, his voice carrying a hint of the musical lilt that characterized her own speech. Auntie Marayo smiled to herself as she listened, satisfaction blooming in her chest. Good, she said finally, her tone softening. You will say this every evening before bed. It is important to practice until it becomes second nature. Yes, Auntie Marayo, he murmured, though a small part of him bristled at the routine. He had no idea what the phrase meant. She had refused to translate it for him, and yet he couldn't help but feel a growing compulsion to perfect it, to earn her approval. The cream after their practice, Auntie Marayo reached for the jar of cream on the tray. She unscrewed the lid, the faint scent of shea butter and herbs wafting into the air. This, she said, holding up the jar, is for your skin. You have some blemishes that need addressing. A proper Yoruba woman must take care of her complexion. James blinked, his cheeks flushing slightly. My skin is fine, he muttered, though he instinctively touched his jawline, where a few faint traces of acne had lingered for years. It is not fine, she said firmly, setting the jar in front of him. Your complexion is uneven, and you have marks that need to fade. This cream will help. Use it every morning and night. He picked up the jar hesitantly, his fingers brushing against the smooth glass. What's in it? Natural ingredients, she replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. Shea butter, cocoa butter, and herbs. It will make your skin soft and smooth. He opened the jar, the creamy texture glistening under the light. The scent was pleasant, and he dabbed a small amount onto his fingertips. Rub it in evenly, she instructed, watching closely as he applied the cream to his face and neck. As the days passed, he noticed subtle changes in his skin. The acne scars began to fade, and his complexion took on a healthier glow. What he didn't notice, at least not at first, was how the cream began to darken his skin, blending the pale tones into a richer, warmer hue. The beard fades a week into using the cream. James woke up one morning to find that his usual stubble was barely visible. He ran a hand over his jaw, confused by the smoothness of his skin. That's strange, he muttered to himself, reaching for his razor. But as the days turned into weeks, he realized he no longer needed to shave at all. When he mentioned it to Auntie Moreo, she simply smiled. The cream works wonders, doesn't it? She said, her tone light. It softens the skin, makes it more delicate. James frowned, but said nothing. Part of him was relieved he had always hated shaving, but another part felt uneasy. The small changes were adding up, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was slipping further away from the man he used to be. Auntie's reflection as James practiced tying his gel later that evening. Auntie Moreo sat back in her chair, her eyes following his movements with a mixture of pride and purpose. His voice, now soft and laced with Yoruba inflections, filled the room as he repeated the evening phrase over and over. Orukomini dayo, obinrin Yoruba agbaraganimi. She smiled, the words echoing in her mind. My name is Dayo. I am a proud Yoruba woman. He didn't know what he was saying yet, but soon he would, and when the time came, he would accept it as truth. Her thoughts drifted to the past, to the countless moments of condescension and dismissal she had endured as a young woman in London. The way men like James had spoken to her, looked at her, treated her as though her culture and identity were something to be mocked or dismissed. She had carried that anger for years, letting it harden into resolve. Now, as she watched James Hideo transform before her eyes, she felt a sense of vindication. This was not just about teaching him respect, it was about reclaiming the power that had been stripped from her so many times before. You are learning, she murmured to herself, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. And soon, you will not remember what it was like to be anything but this. Chapter 10. The check-in call. James sat stiffly on the edge of the armchair in Auntie Moreo's sitting room, his back ramrod straight, ankles crossed neatly, and hands folded delicately in his lap. The outfit she had chosen for him that morning, a rich teal iro and buba with gold embroidery, felt more formal than his usual attire, though he wasn't sure what usual even meant for him anymore. The gelée tied snugly around his head completed the look, its height and intricacy giving him an air of authority he didn't feel. Across the room, Auntie Morayo adjusted the speakerphone on her mobile, her every movement deliberate and commanding. Now, Deo, she said, her tone light but firm. Sit properly. You want to make a good impression, don't you? Yes, Auntie Morayo, James replied automatically, his voice softer than it used to be. He blinked at his own reflection in the mirrored cabinet nearby, catching a glimpse of the way his Jella-framed face tilted slightly as he looked at her. The man staring back at him was barely recognizable, and the realization sent a ripple of unease through him. "Good girl," she murmured with a faint smile before turning her attention to the phone. The call connected, and the deep, clipped tones of his probation officer filled the room. "Good afternoon, Miss Morayo. I trust everything is going well?" "Yes, Mr. Caldwell," she replied smoothly, her voice carrying the same measured authority that had brought James to heel so many times before. "James has been doing very well here. He has shown great improvement in his attitude and his willingness to learn." James bit the inside of his cheek, fighting the urge to roll his eyes. The way she spoke about him made it sound as if he were a schoolboy she was tutoring, not a grown man. But he stayed quiet, his hands gripping the fabric of his booba as he focused on keeping his posture perfect. "That's good to hear," Caldwell said. "We've been hoping this placement would give him some perspective." "Oh, it certainly has," Auntie Morayo said, glancing at James with a knowing smile. "He's been assisting with our cultural events, learning about Yoruba traditions, and even practicing some of the language. He's made remarkable progress." James's stomach twisted as she spoke. While everything she said was technically true, the way she framed it made him sound like a model volunteer, eager and enthusiastic about his role. The truth was far more complicated. "I have to say, I'm impressed," Caldwell continued. "I wasn't sure this placement would suit him, but it sounds like he's thriving." "He is," Auntie Morayo said, her voice warm, but tinged with a hint of pride. "James has come a long way from the man who first walked through my doors. Haven't you, James?" The question hung in the air, and James felt his cheeks flush under her steady gaze. "Yes, sir," he said finally, his voice soft and deferential. "I've learned a lot," Caldwell chuckled. "Glad to hear it. Keep up the good work, James." "I will, sir," James replied, though the words felt hollow. Auntie's subtle manoeuvring as the call continued, James found himself watching Auntie Morayo intently. The way she spoke calm, measured, and confident left no room for doubt in Caldwell's mind. She painted a picture of success and progress, carefully omitting the more unorthodox methods she had employed to achieve it. For a brief moment, James wondered if she truly believed what she was saying, or if this was all part of her strategy. "Of course," she said, her voice softening slightly. "There is still work to be done, but I have no doubt that James will continue to grow under my guidance. He is receptive to instruction." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the words stinging more than he cared to admit. Receptive. She made it sound like he had willingly embraced everything she had imposed on him, as if he hadn't fought tooth and nail to hold on to some semblance of his old self. "I'm sure he is," Caldwell replied. "You're doing a great job, Miss Morayo. We'll touch base again in a few weeks." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she said with a gracious smile. "It's always a pleasure to speak with you." The call ended, and the room fell into silence. James exhaled slowly, his hands unclenching from the fabric of his booba. "A moment of reflection, you see, Deo," Auntie Morayo said, turning to face him. "Even Mr. Caldwell can see how far you've come." James hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. I guess so." She stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You should be proud of yourself. You are learning respect, discipline, and grace. These are things no one can take away from you." "But," he faltered, his thoughts swirling, What if I'm not ready to change this much?" She tilted her head, her expression softening. "Deo, change is not something to fear. It is something to embrace. You are becoming someone stronger, someone better. Trust me." Her words were soothing, yet they left a lingering sense of unease in his chest. He glanced at his reflection again, the vibrant teal of his outfit and the intricate folds of his jail, standing in stark contrast to the man he used to be. "You'll see," she said, her voice firm yet kind. "One day, you will look back on this time and thank me for what I have given you." He nodded slowly, though the conflict in his heart remained. "Yes, Auntie Morayo," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Her smile deepened, and she squeezed his shoulder gently. "Good girl. Now, let us prepare dinner. You may set the table while I cook." Chapter 11. The naming ceremony. Auntie Morayo's excitement was palpable as she bustled around the kitchen, her gel wrapped high and regal atop her head. James, or rather, Deo, as she increasingly insisted on calling him, stood nearby, his hands busy arranging trays of food. The air was thick with the aroma of jollof rice, fried plantains, and spicy pepper soup, all prepared meticulously under her watchful eye. "Deo," she called, glancing over her shoulder, "make sure the agusi soup is in the good serving bowl. We are not presenting cheap dishes to our guests today." "Yes, Auntie Mario," he replied, the words slipping out before he could think. His voice was softer now, carrying a slight lilt that echoed hers, though the realization still made his stomach twist. She had informed him earlier in the week that they would be hosting a Yoruba naming ceremony for a friend's newborn. It was a significant cultural event, steeped in tradition and pride, and Auntie Mario had been clear about one thing: Dio would be participating, not just observing. "You will help me host," she had said firmly. "This is not just about serving food, it is about understanding who we are. You will dress properly, behave properly, and carry yourself with dignity." And so, here he was, dressed in another formal Iro and Buba ensemble, this one a deep burgundy with gold accents. The matching gel sat snugly on his head, tied perfectly thanks to Auntie's relentless practice sessions. He glanced at his reflection in the polished silver serving tray, his appearance startling him anew. Each time he saw himself like this, it was a reminder of how far he had come or fallen, depending on how he chose to see it. The first guests, began arriving just after noon, their vibrant outfits and melodic voices filling the house with energy. Auntie Mario greeted each one warmly, her presence commanding yet gracious. Deo hovered nearby, his hands folded neatly in front of him, his posture as poised as she had drilled into him. "Ah, Deo," one of the women said, her eyes lighting up as she took in his appearance. "You look beautiful today." James flushed, unsure how to respond. Thank you," he mumbled, his gaze dropping to the floor. The woman chuckled, patting his shoulder. "Such a modest girl. Auntie Mario has trained you well." He felt a wave of conflicting emotions: embarrassment, resentment, and, strangely, a flicker of pride at her approval. Before he could dwell on it, Auntie Mario clapped her hands, drawing everyone's attention. "Deo, bring out the drinks," she commanded, her tone brisk but not unkind. "Yes, Auntie," he replied, moving to fetch the tray of drinks. As he weaved through the crowd, offering glasses of palm wine and soda, he couldn't help but notice how naturally the movements came to him now. The soft sway of his hips, the graceful way he carried the trachées, were things he would have scoffed at weeks ago. Yet here he was, performing them effortlessly. The ceremony began with prayers and songs, the rhythmic clapping and chanting filling the room with an infectious energy. Deo found himself drawn to the music, his foot tapping lightly in time with the beat. When it was time to announce the baby's name, the crowd erupted in cheers and ululations, their joy radiating through the space. Auntie Mario stood beside him, her hands clasped in front of her. "You see, Deo," she said quietly, her voice almost tender. "This is what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself, to honor tradition, to celebrate life. It is beautiful, isn't it?" He nodded, unable to deny the truth in her words. Despite his discomfort, there was something deeply moving about the ceremony, the sense of community, the pride in their heritage. For a moment, he felt a flicker of belonging, though it was quickly overshadowed by the realization of how far he had drifted from his old life. The final test, as the ceremony wound down, Auntie Mario approached him with a small basket filled with gifts for the baby. "Deo," she said, her voice firm but kind, "take this to the mother and congratulate her." His heart raced as he took the basket, the weight of her expectations pressing down on him. The mother was seated near the center of the room, surrounded by other women who chatted and laughed in rapid Yoruba. James hesitated, glancing back at Auntie, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Go," she mouthed. He approached slowly, his steps careful and measured. When he reached the mother, he bent slightly at the waist, offering the basket with both hands. "Congratulations," he said softly, his voice carrying the same lilting accent he had practiced under Auntie's guidance. "The baby is beautiful." The mother beamed, taking the basket and clasping his hands in hers. "Thank you, Deo. You are very kind." As he returned to Auntie's side, his cheeks burned with a mix of pride and shame. He had done it, played the role she had crafted for him, and no one had batted an eye. To them, he wasn't James, the brash and insensitive man who had stumbled into their lives. He was Deo, a proper Yoruba woman who carried herself with grace and humility. Auntie's reflection as the last of the guests trickled out. Auntie Mario sat back in her chair, a a satisfied smile playing on her lips. The day had been a success, not just for the naming ceremony, but for Dayo's continued transformation. Watching him navigate the event with poise and dignity, she felt a swell of pride. He was learning not just the motions, but the meaning behind them. He was becoming someone she could be proud of. Her thoughts drifted to her younger self, the girl who had come to this country with dreams of a brighter future, only to face prejudice and condescension at every turn. Turning James into Dayo wasn't just about teaching him respect, it was about reclaiming her power, showing the world and herself that she could shape her own narrative. "You did well today, Dayo," she said softly, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "I am proud of you." He looked at her, his expression conflicted. "Thank you, Auntie," he murmured, his gaze dropping to his hands, which were neatly folded in his lap. "Go and rest," she said, waving him off. "Tomorrow, we will begin preparing for the next event." As he rose and left the room, Auntie Marayo leaned back in her chair, her smile deepening. There was still work to be done, but she was patient. Dayo was becoming exactly who he was meant to be. Chapter 12. A growing acceptance. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the lace curtains in Auntie Marayo's sitting room, casting soft patterns on the polished floors. Dayo sat at the vanity table that now seemed to belong to him more than anyone else, brushing his freshly washed hair in slow, rhythmic strokes. The once mousy strands had grown longer, darker, and softer, thanks to the oils and conditioners Auntie had introduced to his routine. His reflection stared back at him, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't flinch. His skin, once pale and uneven, now carried a warm, rich hue that seemed to glow under the sunlight. It was darker than it had been, even a month ago, thanks to the cream he applied every morning and night under Auntie's careful instruction. The slight roughness of his old complexion was gone, replaced by a smoothness he couldn't help but touch occasionally, still surprised by how soft it felt. As he moved the brush through his hair, he noticed the subtle fullness in his face and the slight curve to his arms that hadn't been there before. Auntie's cooking rich, flavorful, and always abundant had begun to take its toll on his figure. His once angular features had softened, and his midsection now carried a small but noticeable swell. His hips had widened slightly, the fabric of his eye-row wrapping more snugly around them with each passing week. He sighed, setting the brush down and adjusting the gel he had tied earlier. The intricate folds framed his face perfectly, thanks to hours of practice under Auntie's watchful eye. It wasn't just a skill now, it was a ritual, a moment of quiet focus that had become strangely comforting. Dinner with Auntie Dayo. Auntie Marayo's voice rang out from the kitchen. "Are you coming to set the table, or will I have to do it myself?" "Yes, Auntie Marayo," he called back, rising from the vanity and smoothing the folds of his booba. His voice was softer now, carrying the faintest trace of the Yoruba lilt she had been teaching him to use. It felt natural to respond this way, even if part of him still bristled at how easily the words came. He entered the dining room to find her arranging a steaming platter of jollof rice, fried plantains, and grilled fish. The scents were intoxicating, and his stomach growled in anticipation. He moved quickly to set the plates and cutlery, his movements fluid and efficient. As they sat down to eat, Auntie Marayo watched him with a pleased smile. "You're eating well, Dayo," she said, gesturing to his plate. "It suits you." He glanced down at himself, the folds of his eye-row pressing against his fuller thighs as he shifted in his seat. "I've noticed," he muttered, though there was no malice in his tone. "I've put on a bit of weight." "A Yoruba woman is not meant to be thin like a stick," she said firmly, scooping a generous helping of rice onto her plate. "Softness is a sign of health, of prosperity." "It is beautiful." He hesitated, unsure how to respond. The idea of beauty was something he had stopped thinking about weeks ago. It felt irrelevant, given how much his life had changed. But Auntie's words carried a weight that was hard to ignore, and as he took another bite of rice, he felt a strange sense of comfort in them. Reflections in the mirror later that evening, Dayo found himself back at the vanity, the cream jar in hand. He dipped his fingers into the rich mixture, the scent of shea butter and herbs filling the air. As he smoothed it over his face and neck, his eyes lingered on his reflection. The changes were undeniable. His softer features, darker skin, and fuller figure painted a picture that was a far cry from the man who had first walked into Auntie's home. Even his posture was different, his back straighter, his movements more deliberate. He adjusted the folds of his gel, ensuring they were perfect, and tilted his head slightly, just as Auntie had taught him. "You are becoming someone stronger, someone better," she had said more than once. And as much as he wanted to resist, he couldn't deny that her words carried some truth. He felt different, not just physically, but emotionally. The brashness and arrogance that had once defined him were gone, replaced by a quietness he didn't fully understand. Auntie's perspective from the kitchen, Auntie Moreo watched him through the open doorway, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. Deo's transformation was progressing beautifully, each step building on the last. His softer voice, his willingness to wear the clothes she chose for him, the way he now carried himself with grace, it was everything she had envisioned, and more. She thought of her own struggles as a young woman, the condescension and dismissal she had faced from men like James. Turning him into Deo wasn't just about teaching him respect, it was about rewriting the narrative. Deo wasn't just a reflection of her culture's pride, he was a reflection of her power. "You are learning," she murmured to herself. "Soon, you will not remember what it was like to be anyone else." Chapter 13. Auntie's social circle. Deo stood in the kitchen, carefully arranging the last of the snacks on a silver platter. Auntie Mariah's friends were arriving soon, a gathering she held monthly for her Yoruba women's group. These gatherings had become a staple in his life, though they still felt surreal. He had learned how to host under Auntie's meticulous instruction, how to pour tea without spilling, how to greet each guest with a polite bow of the head, and how to ensure every plate was perfectly presented. "Deo," Auntie called from the sitting room. "Are you ready?" "Yes, Auntie Moreo," he replied, smoothing the folds of his eyebrow as he balanced the platter. His voice carried the lilt she had worked so hard to instill in him, and the name Deo rolled off his tongue as naturally as if it had always been his. He entered the room and placed the platter on the table, glancing at the elaborate spread of food and drinks Auntie had prepared. The rich scents of puff-puff, suya, and pepper soup filled the air, mingling with the laughter and chatter of the women who had already arrived. They were dressed in vibrant iro and buba, their jeels towering majestically, and Deo couldn't help but notice how easily he blended in among them. His own outfitter, soft gold and cream ensemble with intricate embroidery, had been chosen by Auntie earlier that day, and he had to admit, it fit him perfectly. Welcoming the guests as more women arrived, Deo moved seamlessly between them, greeting each one with a warm smile and offering refreshments. His gestures were graceful, his demeanour polite exactly as Auntie had taught him. "Ah, Deo," one of the women said with a smile, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. "You look lovely today. That gelée suits you." He flushed slightly, unsure how to respond. "Thank you," he murmured, glancing at Auntie for reassurance. She gave him a small nod, her approval evident in the glint of pride in her eyes. The women accepted him without question, treating him as one of their own. They complimented his cooking, teased him playfully about his delicate manners, and included him in their conversations. For the first time, he felt a sense of belonging, however conflicted it might be. A ghost from the past as the evening wore on, Deo excused himself to fetch more tea from the kitchen. As he placed the kettle on the stove, his phone buzzed on the counter. He blinked, momentarily startled. It had been weeks since he'd thought about his phone, let alone used it. He picked it up hesitantly, his heart sinking as he saw the name flashing on the screen. It was one of his old friends, someone he hadn't spoken to since before he moved in with Auntie. His thumb hovered over the answer button, a part of him yearning for the familiarity of his old life. But another, part quieter, yet stronger part hesitated. What would he even say? How could he explain the person he had become? "Deo." Auntie's voice broke through his thoughts, firm and commanding. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed and her gaze sharp. "Who is calling you?" It's just an old friend," he stammered, his cheeks flushing. Auntie stepped forward, her presence filling the small kitchen. "And what would you say to this friend?" she asked, her tone calm but pointed. "Would you tell him about the Yoruba woman standing here now? About the life you have built under my roof?" He swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the phone. I don't know." She tilted her head, her expression softening just slightly. "Deo," she said, her voice low and steady. "You have come so far. Look at yourself. You are learning respect, discipline, and pride. Would you throw that away to chase a past that no longer fits you?" He glanced down at himself, the folds of his iro, the soft fabric of his buba, the delicate bracelets that jingled faintly on his wrist. His reflection in the microwave surface stared back at him, the golden hues of his skin and the perfectly tied gel framing his face. She was right, he didn't look like James anymore. He didn't feel like James. The phone buzzed again, and with a deep breath, he pressed the decline button. Auntie's smile was small, but victorious, as she watched him set the phone down. "Good girl," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Now, come. The guests are waiting." Rejoining the circle when Deo returned to the sitting room, the women welcomed him back with open arms. One of them beckoned him to sit beside her, and he hesitated for only a moment before folding himself gracefully onto the cushion. His back was straight, his ankles crossed, and his hands rested lightly in his lap, just as Auntie had taught him. The conversations flowed around him, rich with Yoruba phrases and laughter. Dio found himself joining in, his words tentative at first, but growing bolder as the women encouraged him. When one of them teased him about his cooking skills, he laughed along, feeling a warmth that had been missing from his old life. As the evening drew to a close, Auntie Mariah watched him with quiet satisfaction. Deo's transformation was nearly complete not just in appearance, but in spirit. He carried himself with the grace and pride of a proper Yoruba woman, and the doubts that had once clouded his eyes were fading. Auntie's reflection later that night, as she cleaned up the remnants of the gathering, Auntie allowed herself a moment to reflect. Deo had faced a test today, a glimpse of his old life, that could have pulled him back. But he had chosen to stay, to embrace the path she had laid out for him. Her mind wandered to her own journey, the moments of doubt and fear she had faced as a young woman far from home. She had fought to preserve her culture, to hold on to the pride that defined her. And now, through Deo, she was ensuring that pride would endure. "You are learning, my dear," she murmured to herself, a smile tugging at her lips. "And soon, you will see that this is where you were meant to be, all along." Chapter 14. Physical changes and shifting perceptions. Deo stood in front of the full-length mirror in Auntie Mariah's bedroom, adjusting the folds of his eyebrow with practiced precision. His fingers moved deftly, smoothing the fabric until it draped perfectly around his fuller hips. The vibrant patterns of his outfitter deep sapphire and gold ensemble seemed to highlight the subtle curves of his figure, a figure that had softened and rounded over the past few months. He tugged slightly at the waistband, noting how snug it felt compared to when he first started wearing Iro and Buba. His midsection had grown softer, the result of Auntie's hearty cooking, and his inability to resist her endless servings of jollof rice, fried plantains, and egusi soup. His arms, too, had filled out, the once angular lines replaced by gentle curves that matched the rest of his body. Even his face had changed, the sharpness of his jawline now softened into something more delicate. Running a hand over his face, Dio noted how smooth his skin felt. The cream Auntie had insisted he use had not only cleared up his complexion, but left his skin darker, richer, and softer than he had ever imagined. He had stopped shaving weeks ago, though not by choice. His facial hair simply no longer grew. He tried not to dwell on the strangeness of it, focusing instead on the practical advantages. No more razor burn, no more stubble to contend with. His hair, now longer and jet black, framed his face in soft waves beneath the gel he had tied earlier. The gel itself, a towering creation of gold and sapphire, fabric sat proudly on his head, perfectly folded and shaped. It was a skill he had struggled to master, but now the process felt almost meditative, a quiet ritual that brought a sense of accomplishment with each perfect fold. A moment of reflection as he adjusted the gel one final time. Deo caught his reflection fully in the mirror. The person staring back at him was unrecognizable from the man he had been months ago. The pale, scruffy James with the angular features and cocky smirk was gone. In his place stood Dio, a soft-spoken, curvaceous Yoruba woman with smooth, dark skin, a regal posture, and a gaze that carried both grace and quiet confidence. The realization sent a ripple of unease through him. How had he come to this? He touched the fabric of his buba, the smooth texture feeling both foreign and familiar beneath his fingers. He wanted to feel out of place, wanted to bristle at the sight of himself, but he didn't. Instead, there was a strange sense of comfort in the way the outfit hugged his body, in the way the gel framed his face. Deo, Auntie's voice called from the sitting room, pulling him from his thoughts. "Are you ready?" "Yes, Auntie," he replied instinctively, his voice carrying the lilting accent she had taught him. He winced slightly at how natural it sounded, as if the words were no longer his own. He stepped out of the bedroom and into the sitting room, where Auntie was waiting with her usual air of calm authority. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, and a satisfied smile curved her lips. "You look lovely, my dear," she said, her voice warm. "The jail suits you." "Thank you, Auntie," he murmured, his cheeks flushing slightly. He didn't know why her praise affected him so much, but it did. The social circle as the evening wore on, Deo found himself surrounded by Auntie's friends once again. The Yoruba women's group was lively as always, their laughter and chatter filling the room with warmth. Dio moved among them effortlessly, offering tea and snacks, joining in their conversations, and even laughing at their jokes. He realized, with a start, that he enjoyed their company. The women were kind, supportive, and full of life, their energy infectious. They teased him playfully about his cooking skills, complimented his outfit, and even offered tips on tying gel more creatively. "You are becoming quite the hostess, Deo," one of them said, her eyes twinkling. "Soon, we will be taking lessons from you." He laughed softly, unsure how to respond. The compliment felt good, though it also stirred a strange sense of guilt. How had he gone from mocking this culture to immersing himself so completely in it? Unnoticed isolation. It wasn't until later that night, as he prepared for bed, that Deo realized something startling. His entire social life now revolved around Auntie and her Yoruba women's group. He hadn't spoken to his old friends in weeks, hadn't stepped foot in the places he used to frequent. The pub, the coffee shop, even the streets where he used to walk felt like distant memories, places that no longer belonged to him. He sat at the vanity, brushing his hair and staring at his reflection. The person he saw didn't fit into those old spaces, and the thought both terrified and comforted him. He didn't know if he could go back, but he wasn't sure he wanted to, either. "Deo," Auntie's voice called softly from the doorway. "You did well tonight." He turned to look at her, her tall frame silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. "Thank you, Auntie," he said, his voice quiet. She stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You are becoming someone strong, someone graceful. I am proud of you." Her words sent a wave of warmth through him, and he nodded, unable to find the words to respond. As she left the room, he turned back to the mirror, his reflection staring back at him. "Deo," he whispered to himself, the name feeling both strange and familiar on his lips. "Who am I becoming?" Chapter 15. A vision-fulfilled Deo stood in front of the mirror, the vibrant pink and white fabric of his new iro and booba hugging his softer figure. The delicate swirls in the fabric shimmered under the light, complemented perfectly by the bold red gel wrapped meticulously around his head. Auntie Marayo, standing just behind him, placed the final touches on his makeup, a touch of blush, gold-toned eyeshadow, and a deep red lipstick that accentuated his fuller lips. "Ah, beautiful," Auntie murmured, stepping back to admire her work. She adjusted the Asso oak shawl draped over his shoulder, ensuring every fold was precise. Perfect for tonight. Deo glanced at himself in the mirror, his expression a mixture of nerves and quiet pride. He hadn't flinched when Auntie presented the outfit to him earlier that day. In fact, he had smiled. "Thank you, Auntie," he had said, his voice soft and sincere. The gesture had surprised even him, but he couldn't deny the warmth he felt at her approval. Now, as he stood there dressed head to toe in regal pink and red, he felt something he hadn't expected, a sense of belonging. The colours, the textures, the intricate designs, they felt right, as though they were an extension of himself. Yet, deep down, a flicker of disbelief lingered. How had he gone from being James, a man who scoffed at everything Auntie represented, to Deo, a Yoruba woman, preparing to host a meeting of strong, proud women? Auntie's reflection, as she watched Deo adjust the folds of his iro in the mirror, Auntie Marayo allowed herself a rare moment of indulgent pride. He was unrecognizable from the man who had walked into her life months ago, a brash, condescending, aimless man who thought the world owed him something. She could still hear his mocking tone when he first saw her in her iro and jail. "Is this what you wear? Must be heavy," he had said with a smirk. "And you don't think it's outdated?" She had looked at him then, her eyes steady, her voice calm but firm. "I want you to understand what it means to be part of something greater than yourself," she had told him. "You are selfish, rude, and ignorant, but I will not give up on you. You will learn respect, humility, and pride in culture, and by the time I am finished with you, you will embody everything you currently mock." The memory brought a small, satisfied smile to her lips. Those words had been a promise, and now, as she looked at Dio, his radiant skin, his poised posture, his perfectly tied gilet, she saw that promise fulfilled. He had become everything she had envisioned, and more. Preparing for the meeting, Dio, Auntie said, breaking the silence. The women will be here soon. Are you ready to greet them? Yes, Auntie, he replied, his voice carrying the soft lilt she had taught him. He smoothed his eyebrow one last time, ensuring it sat perfectly around his hips. His movements were graceful, deliberate, a far cry from the awkward, brash gestures that had once defined him. Good, she said, giving him an approving nod. Remember, tonight is not just about serving food and tea. It is about showing respect, about embodying the values we hold dear. You are not just Deo tonight. You are a Yoruba woman, a reflection of this culture. Her words settled heavily on him, but he nodded. I understand, Auntie. Good girl, she said, her smile widening. Now, go and make sure everything is in place. The meeting begins. The first guests arrived shortly after sunset, their laughter and chatter filling the house with warmth. Deo greeted each one at the door with a polite bow of his head, his hands folded neatly in front of him. Ah, Deo, one of the women said, her eyes lighting up as she took in his outfit. You look stunning tonight. That Jella perfect. Thank you, he murmured, his cheeks flushing. The compliment felt nice, though it stirred a strange mix of pride and discomfort. He wasn't used to being noticed this way, yet he couldn't deny the satisfaction that came with their approval. As the evening progressed, Dio moved effortlessly between the guests, offering tea and snacks, joining in their conversations, and even laughing at their jokes. The women treated him as one of their own, including him in every moment. He felt at ease among them, their energy and warmth drawing him in like a comforting embrace. A quiet moment later that night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet once more, Deo sat at the vanity, removing his makeup. He studied his reflection in the mirror, taking in the dark, smooth complexion, the carefully arched brows, the soft waves of hair that peeked out from under the jail. He didn't look like James anymore. He didn't even feel like James. I've changed, he whispered to himself, the words barely audible. They hung in the air, heavy with truth. Auntie Moreo entered the room, her presence as commanding as ever. Deo, she said, her voice soft but firm. You did well tonight. Thank you, Auntie, he replied, turning to look at her. I'm glad you're proud. She smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. I am always proud of you, my dear. You are becoming someone strong, someone graceful, and most importantly, someone who understands the value of respect and culture. He nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands, which were folded neatly in his lap. Auntie, he began hesitantly. Do you think I'll ever… can I… You are exactly where you are meant to be, she interrupted gently. Trust me, Deo. You are not losing yourself, you are finding who you were meant to be all along. Her words settled over him like a warm blanket, soothing the doubts that still lingered. As she left the room, he turned back to the mirror, his reflection staring back at him. For the first time, he didn't flinch. Chapter 16. Deo takes the lead. The sun streamed through the lace curtains as Deo stood at the kitchen counter, carefully arranging small pastries on a tray. Today was a special day. Auntie Moreo had entrusted him with hosting the monthly Yoruba women's meeting entirely on his own. It was the first time she would step back and allow him to take the lead, and Deo felt a mix of excitement and anxiety bubbling inside him. Deo, Auntie said from the doorway, her presence as commanding as ever. She was dressed in a regal purple and gold outfit, her jail perfectly tied. Remember, you represent this household, and more importantly, you represent me. Do not embarrass yourself. Yes, Auntie, Deo replied, bowing his head slightly. His voice carried the soft lilt she had taught him, and the title Auntie felt as natural as breathing now. Auntie studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes scanning his outfit, a pale lavender iro and booba with intricate silver embroidery. The gel he had tied himself sat proudly atop his head, framing his face perfectly. Good, she said with a small nod. You look presentable. Now, let's see if you can handle this. Preparing for the guests as Auntie retreated to her room to stay out of your way, as she had put it, Deo busied himself with the final preparations. The house was spotless, every surface gleaming under the afternoon light. The dining table was set with Auntie's finest china, and the aroma of freshly cooked jollof rice, fried plantains, and pepper soup filled the air. He moved through the tasks with ease, his movements graceful and deliberate. Months of Auntie's training had turned him into a capable and efficient host, and though he was nervous, he felt a quiet sense of pride in how far he had come. The first guests arrived promptly at 4 p.m. their laughter and chatter filling the house with warmth. Deo greeted each woman at the door with a polite bow of his head, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "Ah, Deo," one of the women said with a smile, her eyes lighting up as she took in his outfit. "You look lovely as always. That gel is perfection." "Thank you," he murmured, his cheeks flushing slightly. He guided her to the sitting room, where the other women were beginning to gather. As more guests arrived, Deo moved seamlessly between them, offering refreshments and joining in their conversations. He felt a small burst of pride each time one of the women complimented the food or praised the elegant setup. "You've done well, Deo," one of the older women said, patting his hand affectionately. Auntie Mariah must be so proud. Taking charge as the meeting began, Deo found himself standing at the center of the room, all eyes on him. Auntie had tasked him with leading the discussion today, a daunting prospect, but one he was determined to handle with grace. "Ladies," he began, his voice soft but steady, "thank you for coming today. Auntie Mariah has always said that these gatherings are a way to celebrate our culture and support one another. I hope I can do her proud." The women nodded in approval, their smiles encouraging him to continue. He guided the discussion skillfully, asking questions and ensuring everyone had a chance to speak. The topics ranged from family matters to community events, and Deo found himself fully engaged, his nerves fading with each passing moment. A small test as the meeting progressed, one of the women leaned over to Deo, lowering her voice. "I couldn't help but notice your accent, Deo. It's lovely, so natural. Have you always spoken this way?" He hesitated for the briefest moment, his mind flashing back to the man he had been before Auntie took him in. "It's something I've learned," he said finally, his tone measured. "Auntie Moreo has taught me a lot." The woman smiled, patting his hand. "She has done well then. You sound like one of us." The words lingered in Deo's mind, filling him with both pride and a twinge of unease. Was he truly becoming one of them? And if so, what did that mean for the person he used to be? Auntie's silent approval from the doorway. Auntie Mariah watched quietly, her arms crossed, and a small smile playing on her lips. Deo had handled the evening beautifully, his poise and grace a testament to everything she had taught him. He moved among the women with ease, his laughter mingling with theirs, his voice soft and melodic as he joined in the conversation. "Good girl," she murmured to herself, her chest swelling with pride. Deo was no longer the brash, aimless man she had taken in. He was someone entirely new, someone better. And as she watched him now, she knew she had made the right decision in transforming him. Reflecting on the evening later that night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet once more, Deo sat at the vanity, removing his gel and undoing the folds of his eyebrow. He felt a strange sense of accomplishment, though he wasn't sure why. Hosting the meeting had been exhausting, but it had also felt rewarding. He glanced at his reflection in the mirror, his soft, dark skin glowing under the warm light. The person staring back at him was Deo, through and through a poised, confident Yoruba woman who had earned the respect and admiration of Auntie's friends. As he brushed his hair, Auntie entered the room, her presence as commanding as ever. "You did well tonight, Deo," she said, her voice warm. "You made me proud." "Thank you, Auntie," he replied, his voice soft. The words felt natural, genuine. He met her gaze in the mirror, his own eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and quiet acceptance. "You are learning," she continued, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Step by step, you are becoming someone strong, someone worthy. Never forget that." He nodded, his heart swelling at her praise. As she left the room, he turned back to the mirror, his reflection staring back at him. For the first time, he didn't feel conflicted. He felt content. Chapter 17. A reward and an unexpected encounter. Deo stood in front of the vanity in Auntie Moreo's bedroom, carefully folding and tying his new gel. The mustard yellow fabric shimmered in the light, a vibrant complement to the intricate patterns of his iro and buba. Auntie had presented the outfit to him that morning, a reward for his flawless hosting of the Yoruba women's meeting. "You have done well, Deo," she had said with a proud smile. "You deserve this." As he worked, his fingers moved with precision, each fold of the gel creating a towering masterpiece. The skill had not come easily. There had been tears and frustration in the beginning, but now, tying a gel felt as natural as breathing. He stepped back from the mirror to admire his work, his reflection staring back at him with a poise and grace that still felt surreal. "You are learning," Auntie said, watching from the doorway. She was dressed in a coordinating outfit, her gel tied just as perfectly. "When I first put a head wrap on you, I wasn't sure you would ever come this far. But here you are, Deo, exactly as I hoped you would be. Deo turned to her, his cheeks flushing at the praise. Thank you, Auntie, he said softly, his voice carrying the lilting Nigerian accent that had become second nature. Come now, she said, gesturing for him to follow. We mustn't keep the visitors waiting. At the cultural centre was bustling with activity when they arrived. Auntie had volunteered to help with the day's events, and she had insisted that Dio join her. It was a chance, she said, to share their culture with the community, and for Dio to continue refining his role as a proper Yoruba woman. Dio moved through the crowd with ease, greeting visitors with a warm smile and a polite bow of his head. Boyni, welcome, he said to each guest, his voice soft and melodic. He directed them to exhibits, answered questions about Yoruba traditions, and ensured that everyone felt welcome. You are doing well, my dear, Auntie said as she passed him, her eyes shining with pride. Keep it up, Dio nodded, his heart swelling at her approval. He didn't notice the way some of the guests looked at him, admiring his poise, his outfit, his flawless jelly. To them, he was simply Deo, a gracious and elegant Yoruba woman. An unexpected visitor, Deo, was arranging pamphlets at the welcome table when a familiar voice broke through the hum of the crowd. Excuse me, the man said, his tone firm. I'm looking for James. Do you know where I can find him? Deo froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned slowly, his eyes widening as he recognized the man standing before him. It was Mr. Caldwell, his probation officer. For a moment, Deo couldn't speak. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His mind raced, panicked thoughts swirling as he wondered what Mr. Caldwell would think, what he would say if he realized that the poised, well-dressed woman standing before him was James. Excuse me, Mr. Caldwell said again, his brow furrowing. Did you hear me? Before Deo could stammer a response, Auntie Mario appeared at his side, her presence as commanding as ever. Good afternoon, she said smoothly, her voice warm but firm. How can I help you? Mr. Caldwell glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. I'm looking for James, he said. I was told he might be here. Auntie's smile didn't waver. Ah, James, she said, her tone light. I'm afraid he isn't here today. He has been quite busy lately, helping me with some family matters. I see, Mr. Caldwell said, his tone skeptical. His eyes flicked back to Deo, lingering for a moment. And who might you be? He asked, his gaze narrowing slightly. Deo's breath caught in his throat, but Auntie stepped in before he could respond. This is Deo, she said smoothly. My niece. She has been staying with me for some time now, helping me with my work here. Mr. Caldwell's brow furrowed, but he nodded slowly. Well, he said, please let James know that I stopped by. I'll need to see him soon. Of course, Auntie said, her smile unwavering. I will let him know. With a curt nod, Mr. Caldwell turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Deo released a shaky breath, his hands trembling as he clutched the edge of the table. Auntie's reassurance, Deo, Auntie said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Do not worry. But Auntie, he whispered, his voice trembling. What if he finds out? What if he… Shh, she said, her tone soothing but firm. You must trust me. I will handle Mr. Caldwell. You have nothing to fear. Deo nodded, though his chest still felt tight. Auntie's calm confidence was reassuring, but the encounter had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. You did well, Auntie said, her hand still resting on his shoulder. You did not panic. You held your composure. That is what matters. Thank you, Auntie, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. A lesson in strength later that evening, as they sat together in the quiet of the living room. Auntie turned to Deo, her expression serious. You see now, she said, why it is important to always carry yourself with grace and poise. The world will test you, Deo. It will try to unravel you, but you must remain strong. Yes, Auntie, he said, his voice steady. You are becoming someone remarkable, she continued, her tone softening. Someone who embodies the pride and strength of our culture. Do not let fear take that away from you. Her words settled over him like a warm blanket, soothing the tension that still lingered in his chest. He nodded, meeting her gaze with quiet determination. I understand, Auntie. Good, she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. Now, go and rest. Tomorrow is another day. As Dio rose and made his way to his room, he felt a renewed sense of resolve. He would trust Auntie. He would continue to learn, to grow, to become the person she believed he could be. And maybe, just maybe, he would find peace in the process. Chapter 18. Fully part of the circle, the house hummed with life as Dio prepared for another gathering at Auntie Mariah's home. This time, it wasn't just the Yoruba women's group, it was an event for the broader community, celebrating culture, connection, and pride. Auntie had placed Dio in charge of several aspects of the event, trusting him to carry them out with the poise and grace she had instilled in him. As he adjusted the folds of his golden iro, Dio caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. His gel, perfectly tied, added an air of regality to his appearance, and the warm tones of his outfit complemented his dark, smooth complexion. He stood straighter, his back instinctively aligned, his hands folded neatly in front of him. For a moment, his thoughts drifted back to the encounter with Mr. Caldwell at the cultural centre. A moment of reflection, Dio's mind replayed the scene in vivid detail. The way Mr. Caldwell had looked at him, his expression blank and unrecognizing, stood out most. Not once had his probation officer made a connection between the poised Yoruba woman before him and the brash, condescending man he had once supervised. He saw me, Dio thought, but not as James. He saw Dio. The realization left him both relieved and unsettled. He couldn't decide which emotion held more weight. On one hand, there was a strange comfort in the fact that no one, not even someone who knew his past, could see through the transformation. On the other hand, the complete erasure of James felt like a loss he wasn't yet ready to confront. But as the smell of fried plantains and pepper soup wafted through the air, pulling him back to the present, Dio pushed the thought aside. He had work to do. The event begins. The first guests arrived just after sunset, their laughter and chatter filling the house with warmth. Dio greeted each one at the door, bowing his head slightly and offering a soft "Ikabo" welcome. His lilting Nigerian accent flowed effortlessly, a testament to Auntie's diligent coaching. "Ah, Dio," one of the women exclaimed, her eyes lighting up as she took in his outfit. "You look stunning tonight." "Thank you," Dio replied, his cheeks warming at the compliment. He led her into the living room, where Auntie was already entertaining a small group. As more guests arrived, Dio moved seamlessly between them, ensuring everyone was comfortable and had something to eat or drink. His movements were graceful, his demeanor warm and inviting. The women included him in their conversations, without hesitation, treating him as one of their own. "You have done well, my dear," one of the older women said, patting his arm affectionately. Auntie Moreo must be very proud. Auntie's vision from across the room. Auntie Moreo watched the scene unfold, her eyes shining with quiet pride. Dio had become everything she had hoped for, a poised, confident Yoruba woman who embodied the culture with grace and dignity. She thought back to the day James had first walked into her home. He had been everything she despised: arrogant, rude, dismissive of her traditions and values. But she had seen potential in him, buried beneath layers of ignorance and entitlement. "You will learn," she had told him. "You will see what it means to be part of something greater than yourself." Now, as she watched him laugh and chat with her friends, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He wasn't just part of her community, he was thriving in it. Strengthening connections as the evening progressed, Auntie began introducing Dio to more members of her network. She made a point to highlight his contributions, praising his cooking skills, his hospitality, and his growing fluency in Yoruba. "This is Dio," she said proudly to one of the newcomers. "My niece. She has been such a blessing to me." Dio smiled politely, bowing his head. "It is all because of Auntie's guidance," he said softly. The women around them nodded approvingly, their smiles warm and encouraging. They didn't see a man pretending to be something he wasn't. They saw a fellow Yoruba woman, someone who shared their values and traditions. A subtle reminder toward the end of the evening, one of the women pulled Dio aside. "Dio," she said, her tone kind but firm, "I wanted to say how impressed I am with you. When I first met you, I wasn't sure if you would fit in, but look at you now, so graceful, so respectful." "Thank you," Dio replied, though his heart sank slightly at the reminder of who he used to be. "You should be proud of yourself," the woman continued. "You are a reflection of our culture. Never forget that." Dio nodded, the weight of her words settling heavily on his shoulders. As he returned to the group, he couldn't help but wonder, had he truly embraced this new identity, or had it simply been imposed on him? Auntie's final words as the last guest left and the house fell silent. Auntie found Dio in the kitchen, washing dishes. She leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed, and a small smile playing on her lips. "You did well tonight, Dio," she said. "Thank you, Auntie," he replied, glancing at her over his shoulder. "You are becoming someone remarkable," she continued. Someone who represents the best of our culture. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the soapy water in the sink. It's because of you, Auntie. You've taught me so much. She stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. And there is still more to learn, my dear. But for now, rest. You have earned it. As Deo dried his hands and made his way to his room, he felt a strange mix of emotions, pride, gratitude, and an unshakable sense of loss. But as he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, his jail still perfectly tied, he couldn't deny one thing. He was no longer James. He was Deo, through and through. Chapter 19. A visitor returns. The warm afternoon sun filtered through the windows as Auntie Mario adjusted the folds of her rich green and gold iro, the matching gel on her head, a masterful creation that only her skilled hands could craft. Beside her stood Dio, adorned in a stunning coral and cream ensemble. The flowing fabric hugged his softened curves, his gel tied with a precision that spoke of hours of practice. The two of them were preparing to head to the cultural centre for another event when the knock on the door interrupted their plans. "Deo, my dear, see who it is," Auntie said, her tone calm yet commanding. "Yes, Auntie," Deo replied, smoothing his booba before gliding gracefully to the door. His movements, refined through Auntie's relentless coaching, were fluid and feminine. Opening the door, Deo froze for a moment, his breath catching in his throat. Standing before him was Mr. Caldwell, his probation officer. The man's sharp eyes scanned him briefly before he spoke. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for James," Mr. Caldwell said, his tone brisk. Deo hesitated, his heart pounding. He glanced back at Auntie, who was already approaching, her expression calm but unreadable. "Ah, Mr. Caldwell," Auntie said warmly, stepping forward to greet him. "How unexpected. Please do come in." Mr. Caldwell entered, his gaze briefly flicking back to Deo, though there was no recognition in his eyes. Deo, recovering from his initial panic, folded his hands neatly in front of him and bowed his head slightly. "Good afternoon, sir," he said softly, his lilting Nigerian accent flowing effortlessly. "Good afternoon," Mr. Caldwell replied, nodding curtly. He turned to Auntie. "I was hoping to speak with James. I haven't been able to get in touch with him." Auntie's smile remained steady. "I see," she said, motioning for him to sit. "Please, have a seat, and let us discuss this." Auntie's explanation as they all settled into the sitting room, Auntie gestured for Deo to bring refreshments. He moved gracefully, his gel bobbing slightly as he poured a cup of tea and handed it to Mr. Caldwell. "Thank you," Mr. Caldwell said absent-mindedly before turning back to Auntie. "So, where is James?" Auntie sighed softly, shaking her head. "James has had a bit of a change in circumstances," she said, her tone carefully measured. "He was helping me with some family matters, but those matters became more complicated than expected. He decided to step back and focus on himself." Mr. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "Step back? What do you mean?" "He felt that his old ways were not serving him well," Auntie continued smoothly, "and he has chosen a different path, one that I believe will bring him peace and purpose." Mr. Caldwell frowned, clearly unsatisfied with the vague response. "That's all well and good, but I still need to follow up with him. He has obligations." "Of course," Auntie said, her tone conciliatory. "And I assure you, Mr. Caldwell, that James is fulfilling those obligations in his own way." Mr. Caldwell glanced at Deo, who sat quietly beside Auntie, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "And who is this?" he asked, gesturing toward Deo. "This is my niece, Deo," Auntie said smoothly. "She has been helping me with my work at the cultural centre, a bright, hard-working young woman." "Pleased to meet you," Deo said softly, tilting his head slightly in a gesture of respect. Mr. Caldwell studied him for a moment, his gaze lingering on Dio's smooth, dark skin, perfectly tied gel, and elegantly composed demeanour. If there was any flicker of recognition, he didn't show it. "You have a lovely home," Mr. Caldwell said finally, his tone polite but distracted. "Please let James know that I still need to speak with him." "I will pass along the message," Auntie said, rising to her feet. "Thank you for stopping by, Mr. Caldwell. I hope you have a wonderful day." Deo rose as well, smoothing the folds of his iro as he bowed his head. "Thank you, sir," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. After the visit, as soon as the door closed behind Mr. Caldwell, Deo let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling slightly. "Auntie," he began, his voice wavering. "What if he Auntie said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You handled yourself beautifully, my dear. There is nothing to fear." "But what if he finds out?" Deo whispered, his eyes wide with panic. Auntie smiled, her grip on his shoulder firm but comforting. Mr. Caldwell sees only what I want him to see, she said. And what he saw today was a poised, elegant Yoruba woman, not James. Dio. Dio nodded slowly, though his heart still raced. He glanced at his reflection in the hallway mirror, taking in his flawless makeup, intricately tied gele, and regal outfit. The person staring back at him was unrecognizable as the man he had once been. You are doing so well, Auntie said, her voice softening. Step by step, you are becoming everything I knew you could be. Never forget that. Thank you, Auntie, Deo murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Auntie's reflection later that evening, as she sat in the quiet of the living room, Auntie allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The visit from Mr. Caldwell had been an unexpected test, but Deo had passed with flying colours. She thought back to the day James had arrived at her home brash, arrogant and utterly lost. He had mocked her culture, dismissed her values, and resisted her guidance at every turn. But now, as Deo, he was unrecognisable gracious, humble, and full of promise. You have come so far, she thought, her heart swelling with pride. And there is still so much more for you to learn. Auntie smiled to herself, already planning the next steps in Deo's transformation. She would continue to guide him, to shape him, to help him become the person he was always meant to be. And as she glanced at the neatly folded mustard yellow outfit on the chair, she knew that Deo's journey was far from over.